You know, I spent 3 tours in Iraq thinking I knew what combat looked like. Boots on the ground, rifle in your hands, looking the enemy in the eye when you pulled the trigger. Then I met Sarah Martinez, and she taught me there are different kinds of battlefields, some of them thousands of miles away from where the warrior sits. This story's gonna change how you think about modern warfare, guaranteed. It was a Saturday morning in October, one of those perfect Las Vegas days where the desert heat finally backs off and you remember why people move here. I was at my nephew's soccer game when I first saw what real invisible wounds look like. Sarah Martinez was sitting by herself on the bleachers, about 10 feet away from the cluster of other parents. Dark sunglasses, even though we were in the shade, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, like it was keeping her anchored to earth. Her daughter Emma was out there on the field, this bright 8-year-old dynamo with her mom's determination written all over her face. The kid was good, too. Lightning fast, fearless, the kind of player who'd rather get kicked in the shins than let someone steal the ball. And every time Emma made a play, she'd look over at her mom, grinning like she'd just conquered the world. Sarah would wave back, but there was something off about it, like she was watching the game through bulletproof glass, present but not really there. Her husband Mike was working the concession stand. Big guy, arms like tree trunks, looked like he could build a house with his bare hands. Former Army infantry, I found out later, the kind of soldier who knows what it means to watch your buddies six. Everything was normal until we heard the helicopter. It started as this distant thumping, barely noticeable over the kids shouting and parents cheering. Medical chopper heading to University Medical Center, probably some routine emergency transport. But the second that sound hit the air, Sarah went rigid. I'm talking statue still, like someone had hit her with a freeze ray. The coffee cup started shaking in her hands, and I could see her breathing getting shallow and fast. Her daughter Emma had just scored a goal and was jumping up and down, waving at the stands. But Sarah couldn't even see her anymore. The helicopter got closer, and Sarah's shaking got worse. She was trying to hide it, hunched over with her arms wrapped around herself, but it was like watching someone try to hold back an earthquake. That's when Karen Williamson decided to get involved. Now, Karen wasn't a bad person. Understand that up front. She was just one of those suburban moms who thought she understood the world because her husband worked in an office and complained about his commute. The kind of woman who put "Support our troops" magnets on her SUV but had never actually met a veteran. Her brother Danny had served in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, traditional infantry, boots-on-the-ground combat, and Danny had some strong opinions about what counted as real military service, especially after he came home and struggled to find work while hearing about all these desk jockey veterans getting preference for jobs. "Military's not what it used to be," Danny would tell Karen during family barbecues. "Half these people claiming PTSD never even saw combat, sitting in air-conditioned offices playing video games and calling themselves warriors." So when Karen saw Sarah having what was obviously a panic attack, her first thought wasn't compassion. It was suspicion. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" Karen said, walking over with that fake concerned voice people use when they're really just being nosy. "You look absolutely terrible." Sarah tried to respond, but couldn't get words out. The helicopter was directly overhead now, and she was gasping for air like she was drowning. Her whole body was shaking, and sweat was pouring down her face despite the cool morning. That's when Mike dropped everything and ran over from the concession stand. The second he saw Sarah, he knew exactly what was happening. He'd been through this before, dozens of times. "Hey, baby, look at me," he said, kneeling down in front of her. "Just look at me. You're here. You're safe. Emma's safe." But by now, half the parents on the bleachers were staring. And Karen, bless her ignorant heart, decided this was the perfect time to share her expert analysis with the other moms. "Poor Emma," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sarah's clearly unstable. I heard she was military, but it's not like she was in real combat or anything." Another mom, Jennifer, leaned in. "What do you mean?" "She was one of those drone people," Karen said with authority she absolutely didn't possess. "My brother Danny was actual infantry in Afghanistan. He says those drone operators just sit in trailers in Nevada, playing video games and calling it war. How traumatic can pressing buttons be?" "Seriously?" said another parent. "My husband has stressful days at the office too, but he doesn't have breakdowns at soccer games." "Someone should call child services," Karen whispered, but not quietly enough. "That woman is clearly unfit to be around children." Mike helped Sarah to their car while Emma stood on the soccer field, confused and scared, watching her mom fall apart in front of everyone. The game was still going, but half the kids had stopped playing to stare. In the car, Emma climbed into the back seat and asked the question that would haunt Sarah for months. "Mommy, why do the other moms think you didn't really fight for America?" Sarah couldn't answer. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that you've killed 47 people in high-definition detail, that you've watched men die on screens so clear you could see their faces, that you know the names of some of their children because you spent weeks studying their families before pulling the trigger? How do you tell your daughter that every time you hear a helicopter, you're back in that trailer at Creech Air Force Base, watching real-time footage of real people dying because of decisions you made?" That night, Mike found Sarah sitting in Emma's bedroom, just watching their daughter sleep. This was her ritual now. Hours every night, making sure Emma was breathing, making sure she was safe, making sure Sarah's invisible war hadn't somehow followed them home. "Maybe they're right," Sarah whispered. "Maybe I am broken. Maybe Emma deserves better than a mom who can't even handle a soccer game." Mike sat down next to her on Emma's little pink chair, looking ridiculous but not caring. "You want to know what those soccer moms don't understand? You saved more American lives than most infantry soldiers ever will. But nobody understands what that cost you." Sarah looked at him like he was crazy. "I sat in a trailer, Mike. I never got shot at. I never carried a wounded buddy to safety. I just watched screens and pressed buttons." "And what did you see on those screens?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then, "Everything. I saw everything." That's when Mike told her about the project he'd been working on for months. See, Mike wasn't just a construction worker. He was also a guy who understood that sometimes the truth needs help getting out. He'd been secretly documenting Sarah's PTSD episodes, not to embarrass her, but because he knew that someday someone was going to need to understand what remote warfare really costs. "I've been recording your nightmares," he said gently. "Your panic attacks, the way you check every lock in the house 3 times before bed, the way you haven't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 3 years. Sarah stared at him. "Why?" "Because when you talk in your sleep, you describe missions, real missions with real consequences, and I've been researching them." Mike pulled out a thick folder full of declassified documents, FOIA requests, and research he'd done through veteran networks. "You weren't just pressing buttons, Sarah. You were conducting surgical strikes that saved American lives, and I can prove it." He showed her mission reports, intelligence assessments, after-action reviews. 47 confirmed kills, but more importantly, 32 terrorist attacks prevented. Schools that didn't get bombed, convoys that didn't get ambushed, American soldiers who came home to their families because Sarah Martinez eliminated threats they never even knew existed. "But I also found something else," Mike said. "You're not alone. There are hundreds of drone operators dealing with the same PTSD, the same guilt, the same nightmares. And the military is pretending it doesn't exist. Over the next week, Mike connected with families of other drone operators through veteran forums and support groups. The stories were identical. Precision warriors trained to kill with surgical accuracy, then abandoned to deal with the psychological aftermath alone. Staff Sergeant Tony Chen in California, awake for 3 days straight because he couldn't stop seeing the faces of his targets. Technical Sergeant Maria Lopez in Colorado, divorced because her husband couldn't understand why she wouldn't talk about her computer job. Senior Airman David Kim in Florida, drinking himself to sleep every night to avoid the dreams. 23 families, all dealing with invisible wounds that the military refused to acknowledge, all because their war was fought with joysticks instead of rifles. But it was Sarah's story that cut deepest. Mike had managed to piece together the details of her most classified mission, the one that broke something inside her that might never fully heal. Afghanistan, September 2020. Intelligence indicated a high-value target. Terrorist commander planning an attack on an elementary school in Kansas City. The compound was in a populated area, civilians everywhere, but the intelligence was solid and time was running out. Sarah spent 6 hours watching that compound through her drone's high-definition cameras. 6 hours learning the rhythms of a family that had no idea they were harboring a terrorist. She watched children play in the courtyard. She watched a grandmother hang laundry on the roof. She watched a young mother chase a toddler around the garden. The target arrived at 1400 hours. Sarah had a 30-second window before he disappeared into the building, and they'd lose him. The intelligence was critical. He was planning to detonate a truck bomb during recess at Westwood Elementary School in Kansas City. Over 200 children were at risk. Sarah took the shot. Clean kill, target eliminated, mission successful. But the explosion brought the grandmother running from the house to see what happened. She collapsed when she saw the body, and Sarah watched her die of what looked like a heart attack. Mission successful. Terrorist eliminated. Attack on American school prevented. 200 children safe. But Sarah had watched it all in high-definition detail. She knew that grandmother's face better than she knew her own mother's. She'd been studying this family for weeks, preparing for the mission. She knew the grandmother made bread every morning at 0600 hours. She knew the woman liked to sit in the garden and read in the afternoons. She knew the grandmother sang lullabies to the children at bedtime. And Sarah had watched her die. That night, Sarah picked Emma up from daycare like nothing happened, made dinner, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, went to sleep at 2200 hours, and woke up at 0347 hours, screaming about grandmothers and bread and lullabies and children who would never see their grandmother again. She never told anyone about the grandmother, not her commanders, not the debrief team, not even Mike, until now. "I saved 200 American children," Sarah told him, tears streaming down her face. "But I can't stop thinking about the one grandmother who died because I was good at my job." That's when Mike knew he had to help her tell this story. But it was going to get worse before it got better. A lot worse. 3 days later, there was a knock on their door. Sarah opened it to find a woman in a business suit with a clipboard and a government badge. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Janet Foster from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of concerns about your fitness as a parent." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, what?" "We have reports that you've been displaying erratic behavior around children, including a public breakdown at a school sporting event. We need to conduct a welfare check on your daughter." The next 2 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. Janet Foster went through their house with a fine-tooth comb, interviewing Emma, checking Sarah's medical records, asking intrusive questions about her military service. "It says here you were involved in overseas combat operations," Janet said, reading from her file. "Do you ever have violent thoughts toward your daughter?" "Are you kidding me?" Sarah said. "I fought for this country. I protected American children." But you weren't in actual combat, correct? You operated equipment remotely? There it was again. The dismissal. The assumption that remote warfare somehow didn't count, didn't matter, didn't leave scars. Emma, bless her 8-year-old heart, spoke up during her interview. My mom is the best mom ever. She makes me pancakes and reads me stories and helps me with math. Sometimes she has bad dreams about work, but she never hurts anyone. In the end, CPS found no evidence of neglect or abuse. But they left a report in Sarah's file, and the warning was clear. One more incident, one more public breakdown, and they'd be back. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table reading online comments about a local news article that had picked up the story. The internet, as always, was full of compassion and understanding. Another fake veteran looking for attention. Real soldiers don't have breakdowns at kids' soccer games. Drone operators aren't even military. They're just video game players with benefits. This woman is clearly unstable. Why is she around children? Mike found her there at 2 a.m., laptop open, tears streaming down her face. They're right, she said. I'm not a real veteran. I never got shot at. I never carried anyone to safety. I just sat in a trailer and killed people I'd been watching for weeks. Mike closed the laptop and pulled her into his arms. You know what you are? You're the woman who prevented a terrorist attack on an elementary school. You're the warrior who saved 200 American children. And you're the mother who's going to help other warriors like you get the help they deserve. How? By telling your story. All of it. The real story. But Sarah wasn't convinced. What if they don't believe me? What if it makes things worse for Emma? What if they take her away? Those were the questions that kept her up for another week. But the decision was made for her when Mike showed her a message from Staff Sergeant Tony Chen in California. My wife left me last month, took our kids, said she couldn't be married to someone who wasn't a real veteran. I've got 247 confirmed kills and 200 flight hours over hostile territory, but apparently that doesn't count because I was sitting in a chair when I did it. I'm thinking about ending it all. If someone doesn't start telling the truth about what we really do, we're going to lose a whole generation of warriors to suicide. That message changed everything. Sarah realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every drone operator who'd been dismissed, ignored, or told their service didn't matter. It was about invisible wounds that the military refused to acknowledge. Okay, she told Mike, let's make your documentary, but we do it right. We tell the whole truth, even the parts that hurt. Mike spent the next 3 months interviewing Sarah for hours every day, documenting not just her missions, but the psychological cost of remote warfare. He interviewed other drone operators, military psychologists, intelligence officials who could speak about declassified operations. The documentary was called The Distance Between. The distance between the warrior and the target, the distance between service and recognition, the distance between invisible wounds and real healing. But even as they were making it, Sarah had doubts. Terrible, gnawing doubts about what it would mean for Emma, for their family, for her own future. What if they court-martial me for revealing classified information? She asked Mike one night. Everything we're using has been declassified through FOIA requests. You're not breaking any laws. What if Emma's friends see it? What if they find out their friend's mom is a killer? What if they find out their friend's mom is a hero? The night before they were supposed to submit the documentary to film festivals, Sarah almost backed out completely. She was in Emma's room again, watching her daughter sleep, thinking about how easy it would be to just delete everything and go back to pretending she was fine. Emma woke up and found her mom sitting there. Mommy, why are you always sad?" Sarah tried to smile. "I'm not sad, baby. I'm just tired. But you have bad dreams every night, and you cry when you think I'm not looking. And sometimes you look at me like you're scared I'm going to disappear." 8 years old, and she saw everything. "Mommy, did something bad happen when you were a soldier?" Sarah made a decision in that moment. Some bad things happened, yes, but some good things happened too. I helped protect people. I helped protect kids like you. Then why won't you tell anyone? Because I'm afraid they won't understand. Emma thought about this with the serious concentration that only children can manage. Then, maybe if you tell them, other soldier moms won't have to be sad like you. Out of the mouths of babes. Mike submitted the documentary to Sundance Film Festival that night. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez was sitting in a theater in Park City, Utah, watching her deepest secrets play out on a screen in front of 300 strangers. The film opened with footage of her soccer field breakdown, then pulled back to reveal the invisible war she'd been fighting for years. It showed her conducting precision strikes that saved American lives. It showed the psychological aftermath of watching people die in high-definition detail. It showed other drone operators struggling with identical wounds, and it showed a military that had created a new kind of warrior without understanding the new kind of trauma they'd created. The audience was dead silent through most of the film, but when it ended, they gave it a 5-minute standing ovation. Among the people in that audience was General Patricia Morrison, the first female commander of a drone squadron, who had been quietly documenting the psychological casualties in her unit for years. Also in the audience was Senator Mark Rodriguez, an Army veteran who had previously believed that drone operators didn't deserve combat decorations. The documentary won both the Audience Award and the Special Jury Prize for Social Impact. But more importantly, it started a conversation that had been years overdue. Within a week, 30 more drone operators had come forward with similar stories. Military psychologists who had been ignored for years suddenly found their research in demand. And Congress announced hearings on remote warfare and veteran mental health. The response wasn't all positive, of course. Sarah received death threats from people who called her a traitor for revealing military operations. She got hate mail from veterans who said she was embarrassing the military by claiming PTSD from a desk job. But she also got a phone call that changed everything. "Sergeant Martinez, this is Congressman Rodriguez. I was at the Sundance premiere of your documentary." Sarah's heart stopped. A congressman was calling her directly. This could be very bad or very good. "Sir, I owe you an apology. I'm an Army veteran myself, and I've spent years believing that drone operators didn't deserve the same recognition as traditional combat troops. Your film opened my eyes to something I should have understood long ago. Will you testify before my committee?" What? The House Armed Services Committee is holding hearings on military mental health, specifically focusing on remote warfare. Your voice needs to be heard. Sarah looked at Mike, who was giving her thumbs up from across the room. "Yes, sir. I'll testify." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, but Sarah almost didn't make it. The night before she was supposed to fly to Washington, Emma came home from school crying. "What happened, baby?" "Tommy Peterson said his dad said you're not a real soldier because real soldiers don't kill people with video games." Sarah's heart broke. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that her story would somehow reflect badly on Emma. But then Emma surprised her. "But I told him that's stupid because my mom saved kids from bad guys and that's what real heroes do." "You did?" "And Mrs. Johnson asked me to tell the class about your medals tomorrow. She said I should be proud of my mom because she protected America." Sarah hugged her daughter and realized that maybe, just maybe, this was going to be okay. The congressional hearing was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The room was packed with reporters, military officials, veteran advocates, and family members of other drone operators. Senator Rodriguez called the hearing to order and introduced Sarah as a warrior whose service has been overlooked by the very institution she served. Sarah read her prepared statement about the psychological cost of remote warfare, but then she went off script. Members of Congress, I want to tell you about the moral injury that happens when you know your enemy better than you know your neighbors. When you watch a terrorist plan an attack on American children, but you also watch him teach his own children to ride bicycles. The room was completely silent. I spent weeks studying the routines of a man I was ordered to kill. I knew he made tea every morning at 06:30. I knew he liked to sit in his garden and read. I knew he sang to his children at bedtime. And I knew he was planning to murder 200 American children at an elementary school in Kansas City. Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. When I took that shot, I saved those American children. But I also watched a grandmother die of a heart attack when she found his body. I watched his children discover that their father was dead. I knew those children's faces, their names, their favorite games. She looked directly at Senator Rodriguez. That's the weight that drone operators carry. We don't just kill targets, we kill human beings that we've studied like family members. And then we go home and make dinner for our own families, and we try to pretend that watching someone die in high-definition detail doesn't leave scars. The hearing room erupted in questions from committee members, but the most important question came from Representative Sarah Chen, herself a veteran. "Sergeant Martinez, what would have happened if you hadn't taken that shot?" "Ma'am, based on intelligence reports, the target was planning to detonate a truck bomb during recess at Westwood Elementary School. The attack was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Over 200 children would have been killed. And you prevented that attack?" "Yes, ma'am." "By yourself?" "My team and I, yes, ma'am." "And yet you've never received a combat action badge or any recognition for saving those children's lives?" "No, ma'am. The military doesn't consider remote operations to qualify for combat decorations." Representative Chen looked at the military officials in the room. "That's going to change." But the most powerful moment came at the end of Sarah's testimony, when an older gentleman in the gallery stood up. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran cap and looked like he'd seen his share of combat. "Excuse me," he said. "My name is Frank Morrison, Vietnam veteran, 173rd Airborne. I want to apologize to this young woman." The room went quiet. I've spent years saying that drone operators weren't real warriors. That PTSD from pushing buttons wasn't the same as PTSD from real combat. But after listening to her testimony, I understand that I was wrong. This woman has seen more death, studied more targets, and carried more weight than most of us ever did. And she did it alone, in a trailer, thousands of miles from any support. Frank looked directly at Sarah. "You're a warrior, Sergeant, and any veteran who says otherwise is a fool." The gallery erupted in applause, and Sarah broke down crying for the first time in public since that soccer game. 3 days later, the military announced new policies recognizing drone operators for combat decorations. The VA began processing retroactive disability claims for remote warfare PTSD. And Congress authorized increased funding for military mental health programs. But the personal victory happened the following week, when Sarah received a call from Dr. James Preston, the VA psychiatrist who had initially dismissed her PTSD claims. "Sergeant Martinez, I owe you an enormous apology. I've spent years misunderstanding the psychological impact of remote warfare. Your testimony made me realize that my own son, who's a drone operator, has been suffering in silence because of attitudes like mine. Dr. Preston, I'm implementing new treatment protocols specifically for remote warfare trauma. Would you be willing to consult on the program?" 6 months later, Sarah opened the Remote Warriors Recovery Center in Las Vegas, the first treatment facility specifically designed for drone operators and cyber warfare veterans. She used proceeds from the documentary, along with donations from viewers who had been moved by her story, to create a place where warriors like her could heal without judgment. The center was located 10 minutes from Creech Air Force Base, where many of the patients were currently serving. Emma helped pick out colors for the children's area where military kids could play while their parents received treatment. The grand opening ceremony was held on Veterans Day, and General Morrison personally presented Sarah with her Combat Action Badge. "This recognition is 30 years overdue," the general said. "For too long, we've failed to understand that the nature of combat has changed, but the cost to our warriors remains the same." Emma stood in the front row, wearing a tiny Air Force t-shirt, beaming with pride as her mom received the recognition she'd earned years ago. But the moment that meant the most came 3 weeks later when Sarah got a phone call from a stranger. "Ms. Martinez, my name is David Johnson. I don't know if you remember, but you prevented a terrorist attack on Westwood Elementary School in Kansas City." Sarah's breath caught. "Sir? My daughter Katie was a second grader at Westwood when that attack was supposed to happen. She's 11 now, and she's alive because of what you did. We'd like to meet you, if that's okay." The Johnson family drove from Kansas City to Las Vegas the following weekend. David, his wife Jennifer, and their daughter Katie, who was now 11 and loved soccer, just like Emma. They met at Sarah's house, and for the first time since that mission in 2020, Sarah saw the tangible result of her work. Katie was a real person, not just a statistic in an intelligence report. She was alive, healthy, happy, and completely unaware that she'd once been 36 hours away from dying in a terrorist attack. The kids hit it off immediately, running around the backyard while the adults talked. Sarah watched Katie laugh and play with Emma, and something that had been broken inside her for 4 years finally started to heal. "I need you to know," David told her, "that Katie wants to join the Air Force when she grows up. She wants to be like the woman who saved her school." Sarah started crying again, but this time they were good tears. That afternoon, while the girls played in the backyard, Sarah sat with David and Jennifer and told them the whole story. About studying the target for weeks, about knowing his routines and his family, about watching the grandmother die, about carrying that weight for years. "I saved your daughter," Sarah said, "but I've never been able to forgive myself for the grandmother who died." Jennifer took her hand. "You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. You chose to save children over everything else. That makes you a hero, not a killer." By the end of the visit, Katie and Emma had exchanged phone numbers and made plans for Katie's family to visit again. As they were leaving, Katie gave Sarah a drawing she'd made during the visit. It showed 2 stick figures labeled Katie and Emma playing soccer, with another stick figure in an Air Force uniform labeled Hero Mom watching from the sidelines. At the top, in 11-year-old handwriting, it said, "Thank you for saving my life." Sarah keeps that drawing on her desk at the Recovery Center, where she now helps other drone operators work through the invisible wounds of remote warfare. The center has treated over 200 veterans in its first year, with a success rate that's gotten attention from the VA and military medical community nationwide. Sarah's treatment model, which focuses specifically on moral injury rather than traditional PTSD, is being adopted by VA centers across the country. But the victory that matters most to Sarah happened at Emma's school 3 months after the Recovery Center opened. The teacher, Mrs. Johnson, had invited Sarah to speak to Emma's class about military service as part of their Veterans Day project. Sarah was nervous. Talking to adults was one thing, but explaining her job to 8-year-olds was something else entirely. She brought her medals, some declassified photos, and a simple explanation of what the Air Force does to protect America. But the kids, being kids, asked the hard questions immediately. "Mrs. Martinez, did you really kill people?" asked Tommy Peterson, the same kid who'd given Emma trouble before. Sarah took a deep breath. She'd practiced this answer, but it was still hard to say. "Yes, I did. My job was to stop bad people who wanted to hurt innocent children, like all of you. Sometimes the only way to stop them was to make sure they couldn't hurt anyone ever again." "Were you scared?" asked a little girl named Sophie. "Every single time. But I was more scared of what would happen to innocent people if I didn't do my job." "Do you feel bad about it?" Tommy asked. Sarah looked around the room at these 8-year-olds, so innocent and trusting, and decided to tell them the complete truth. "Yes, I do feel bad about it. Taking someone's life, even to protect other people, is the hardest thing a person can do. It's something that stays with you forever. But I also know that because I did my job, hundreds of children just like you got to go home to their families safe." The room was completely silent. Then Emma raised her hand. "Mom, did you really save kids like us?" "Yes, baby. That was my job, to make sure kids like you could go to school and play soccer and sleep safely in your beds." Tommy Peterson raised his hand again. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm sorry I said you weren't a real soldier. My dad was wrong about that." After Sarah's presentation, Mrs. Johnson pulled her aside. "I've had a lot of veterans speak to my classes over the years, but I've never seen kids respond like that. You gave them an honest answer about something incredibly difficult, and they understood it." The teacher paused. "My husband is a Marine veteran, and he's always said that the hardest part of war isn't the fear or the danger. It's carrying the weight of the choices you had to make. I think you helped these kids understand what service really means." 3 years later, Sarah's story has become a case study in military academies about the psychological cost of modern warfare. Her documentary has been viewed over 10 million times and is required viewing for drone operator training programs. The Remote Warriors Recovery Center has expanded to 3 locations and helped over 800 veterans. Sarah has testified before Congress 4 more times, and her recommendations have been adopted as official military policy for rotation schedules and mental health support. But the achievement she's most proud of is smaller and more personal. Last month, Staff Sergeant Tony Chen, the operator who had considered suicide, called Sarah to tell her he'd reconciled with his wife and kids. "Your story saved my life," he said. "My family is back together because you had the courage to tell the truth about what we really do." Emma, now 11, is still playing soccer, but she's also started a project at school collecting care packages for active-duty drone operators. "They protect us," she tells anyone who'll listen, "and my mom protects them." Just last week, Sarah got a letter from a high school senior in Kansas City named Katie Johnson. "Dear Ms. Martinez," it read, "I don't know if you remember me, but you saved my life when I was 7 years old. I'm graduating next month, and I've been accepted to the Air Force Academy. I want to serve my country like you did, and protect kids like you protected me. Thank you for showing me what a real hero looks like." Sarah has that letter framed on her office wall, right next to Katie's stick figure drawing from 4 years ago. These days, Sarah sleeps through the night more often than not. She still has nightmares sometimes, but they're balanced by dreams about the children she saved, the families that stayed together, the warriors she's helped heal. At Emma's most recent soccer game, Sarah sat with the other parents instead of by herself. Karen Williamson, who had become a genuine friend after educating herself about military service, saved her a seat. When a helicopter flew overhead during the second half, Sarah tensed for a moment, but she didn't have a panic attack. Emma scored 2 goals, and her mom was right there to cheer her on. After the game, Tommy Peterson ran up to Sarah. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm doing a school report on modern military heroes. Can I interview you?" "Of course," Sarah said. "But why modern heroes?" "Because my dad says the heroes fighting for us today are different from the heroes who fought in the old wars, but they're just as brave. He says you proved that." That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked her a question that showed how much both of them had grown. "Mom, do you think the grandmother who died was proud that you saved all those kids?" Sarah thought about it carefully. I think she would understand why I had to make that choice." And I think she'd be proud that I'm helping other warriors who had to make hard choices too. I'm proud of you too, Mom. Even though your mom is someone who had to do scary things, especially because of that, Emma said with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children. Anyone can be brave when they're not scared. You were brave when you were terrified, and you were brave when people said mean things about you, and you're still brave now when you help other people be brave too. Sarah Martinez still carries the weight of 47 confirmed kills and one grandmother who died of a heart attack. But she also carries the knowledge that over 200 children are alive because of choices she made in a trailer in Nevada. More importantly, she's created a place where other warriors can learn to carry their weight without carrying it alone. And that, my friends, is how one woman's invisible war became a visible victory for every warrior fighting battles that civilians will never understand. Sarah never asked to become the face of remote warfare, but sometimes the people who change the world are the ones who never wanted the job in the first place. Last I heard, the Remote Warriors Recovery Center just opened its 5th location, and Emma Martinez is considering following in her mom's footsteps, not as a drone operator, but as a military psychologist specializing in moral injury. Now that's what I call a mission that keeps on giving.